Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Come on in. You know, we waited just for you, so have a seat.
Oh, shoot. Finally they're here.
Yeah, they're finally here. We can get started. My name is Marty Ackitts. I think you all know me. I'm the adult programming coordinator here for Peter White Public Library. I want to welcome you here for this really wonderful event. And I have to make you aware of a couple groups that really help us out in putting on programs. One is the Carol Paul Memorial Trust Fund. They pay for all the musical events. The reason that you're listening to music tonight in the beginning of the event, that was Mozart, by the way, and it was a CD that was in the Friends of the Library bookstore. So you can go up and purchase this CD for just a couple dollars.
You couldn't find any Jimmy Buffett.
No, I wasn't. I thought Jimmy Buffett's probably not good for this event. But anyway, we're not going to be listening to Cheeseburger in Paradise tonight. Anyway, but the Carol Paul Memorial Trust Fund gives us money for all the events that deal with music or have music as a part of them. And then also the Friends of Peter White Public Library who purchased all of the live streaming equipment. So if you are watching this live online or after the event, you have the Friends of Peter White Public Library to thank for that. So I'm just going to make you aware of a couple of the things that are coming up in the next couple of weeks. This coming Friday at 12 noon here in the community room, we're going to be watching as part of our docu-cinema series a film called The Girl on the Bridge, and that is in honor of National Suicide Prevention Week, which is happening this week. So that is a documentary about a woman who I believe survived a suicide attempt and talks about it. So it's a really powerful film. And then on Magic series, it's origami this month. So show up and learn how to make a paper crane. I've tried this. My paper cranes look like worms, so I'm not good at origami. I've learned this. Anyway, then next week, Wednesday, we have a book launch reading. Lynn Domina, who used to be head of the English department and now is a professor in the English department, just published this book. It's a beautiful collection of poems called Inland Sea, all about Lake Superior. So I have the one copy that we have at the library right now. I'll be returning it in just a few days. I haven't finished it yet. But Lynn will be here next week, Wednesday at 7 p.m. To do a reading from her book, and she'll be here selling copies of her book. And I'm sure that if you buy her a beer, she'll autograph it for you, too. That was a joke, people.
Oh. I'll autograph it, too.
Okay, there you go. And then, let's see, then next week, Thursday, we have our monthly meeting of the Marquette Poets Circle. And that's an open mic workshop, and also after the workshop, we also have an open mic for anybody that wants to come and sing, tell a story, read a poem. That's next Thursday starting at 6:30. And then next Friday is our Global Cinema Day, and that's going to be 12 p.m. here in the community room, I believe. No, wait, yes, in the community room, and that is going to be Louis Malle's Au revoir les enfants. And if you've not seen that movie, it is about two children growing up in Paris during World War II. One of the boys is Jewish and one of them is not, and so it's their friendship that they develop during the war. So lots of great things coming up. It's all in the pamphlets here that we have at the back. But tonight you're here to hear George Robson do his presentation on. He said that someone told him he should call it the bloodbath at Bath or something like that, and I said, thank goodness you didn't do that. No. But he's going to be talking about the Bath School Massacre, which not a lot of people, surprisingly, are aware of. That we hold the dubious distinction of in Michigan of having the worst school massacre in the history of the United States. And the first, well, I'll let you do this. Right, You're going to do this. So anyway, I've just had a wonderful conversation with George over the last 45 minutes or so. So please welcome to the stage George Robson.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. How many, as he said, so few people have heard about this. How many people know about this? Wow. And how did you learn about it? Just... Oh, okay. You wouldn't believe the number of people I've met in East Lansing and surrounding areas that have never heard about it. It's just crazy. How about you? How'd you? Oh, in the books, yeah, and there's been a few books on it, but yeah, it's really something. I met a person recently. He taught criminal justice at Michigan State for 45 years and had never heard of it. He's 5 miles away from this event, knew nothing about it. And I thought, okay, he's heard about it. He just doesn't know the specifics or whatever. But no, it had never been discussed, never brought up. So yeah, it's really something. But anyway, well, the reason I do it, thank you for coming. It was on May 18th, 1927. And a few years ago in Petoskey, Michael Moore showed up, and he was showing Bowling for Columbine. And at the end of the movie, he gets up, and there's probably, oh my gosh, it was this huge crowd at the college in Petoskey. He says, how many people here know that Michigan is the home to the first and worst case of domestic terrorism aimed at school children? Worse than Columbine, worse than Sandy Hook, worse than Parkland, where he went down the list, and the whole crowd just sat there, not one single person. They were just in shock. And so he gave his little description of it, and I went up to him at the end, and I told him my connection, and he looks at me, and he goes, you got to tell this. And I said, okay, all right. So Mike Moore is responsible for me being here. And the first thing I always cover is, where is Bath? How many people know where Bath is? Oh, look at this. I always have people show me their Michigan map. And where is, it's right outside Lansing. It's 5 miles outside Lansing, little farming village. Been there since 1852, the unincorporated town. And it's right here, always for the specifics here. And but here's Lansing, and Bath is right to the northeast, and Hazlitt is right down that same area as well. But it's a very small farming town, and I grew up 2 miles outside of town. I didn't grow up inside of Bath. I grew up on Robson Road. Matter of fact, I was about 10 years old before I realized that not everybody lived on a road with their name on it. I just thought, well, everybody lives on their family's name. That's just obvious. But that wasn't the case. But I grew up out on Robson Road. And you recognize me, right? Haven't changed a bit, right? Haven't changed a bit. That's in 1959, and this is my dad was very proud of this car. Anybody identify the car? Sure. 19 what? 19 what year? Close. 1958 Chevy Bel Air wagon. Sedan. And that's my dad, Byron, standing back by the car, and he was very proud of that car. Oh, he was so happy he got that car. And this was a big year, 1959, because it was his 50th birthday. And my mother organized a surprise 50th birthday party for him. And she was very organized. She was a teacher, and she was very organized, da-da-da-da. So she sends my father off to the bar with my uncle to have a beer for his 50th birthday, and he's gone for 4 hours. And all of the people come, the cars are parked behind the barn to hide the barn, da-da-da-da. And I remember my mother out in the dark, looking up at the sky going, oh boy, I'm going to kill him. If he ever showed up. And he finally showed up. It was in June. It was dark, so you know how late it was, but he finally came. But it was his 50th birthday party. But I was turning 9 that year. It was a very big year for me, too, because I got a brand new for my birthday. Anybody identify that bike? I've had a few people. Close, no. A Roadmaster, a red Roadmaster 2-wheel bike, boy's bike. And I got that for my birthday, and it was so exciting because I grew up in a family mostly of girls, and so it was all girls' bikes, if there were any bikes around. And then also my dad and his brother, were sons of a British farming family, and they were big on tricycles, so it was either tricycles or girls' bikes, and so to have a brand new boy's bike, boy, that was a big deal. And so what I started to do, we lived on a mile-long Robson Road, and this is the family barn, which still sits there. A young family purchased this a couple years ago, and all the old barns are just falling down, just decrepit. They purchased this barn, completely redid the roof, the foundation, repainted it, kept his name on the barn. It's just beautiful. I just can't believe it. But I would start riding up and down that road, a dirt road, a farm road back in the 50s with a two-wheel boy's bike. It was horrible. I probably did it twice and said, all right, I've had enough of that. And a quarter mile away from us was Clark Road, and Clark Road was a paved road that ran east and west into Bath. And so I wouldn't tell anybody I was doing it, but I would go down to Clark Road and I'd ride like 100 yards on a paved road. As long as I could see my house up on top of the hill, I knew I wasn't in trouble. So I would, do it, and I wouldn't tell my parents I was doing it. It was very exciting. Well, one day that summer, my mother was teaching summer school in the Bath schools, and I thought, okay, I'm going to ride all the way into Bath, 2 miles on a paved road. Oh, I can remember the day, I can remember the weather, everything about it. And I ride into Bath, and I find the little convenience store downtown, tiny little convenience store. And I don't know how I had any money, but I bought a Mound candy bar. Remember those bars? Those round bars, those round chocolate bars? Oh, I was so excited. Bought that. And I walk up to the school, which sat right up on top of the hill in Bath, and that's exactly the way it looked. And I didn't know anything about the school because I didn't go to school there. I went to school in East Lansing at the Catholic grade school. But I parked my bike outside the school there, and I walk into the school. And I start looking for my mother to see where she is, just to brag to her about my big trip on my bicycle into school. And I find this statue down one hallway. And it's called Girl with a Cat. You can't read the inscription there. But it's this beautiful statue. And it says, who did it and where he was from and this kind of stuff. And at the bottom it says, made with pennies donated by children around America to honor the Bath school tragedy. And I thought, what is that? So I'm just looking at it. So I finally find my mother, and I said, what's that? After I bragged to her about riding 2 miles on my bike, I say, what is that statue about? What are they talking about? And she said, oh, there was, when I was in school, there was a bad accident, and some kids were hurt, and a few kids were killed. And I said, oh, okay. And I didn't know any of the kids because we lived outside of town. I didn't go to school, and so I knew nobody, so it meant nothing to me. And I thought, okay, it was just a bad accident. Well, later that summer, I'm in my grandfather's, he was a British farmer, so he had a library like the Smithsonian Institution. It was just like, oh my God, I wish I had a picture of his library back then. But I find this, I'm looking around for books in his library, and I find this little tiny book, and I still have the copy of it, The Bath School Disaster by M.J. Ellsworth, who was a local resident at the time. And you can read it, as you can see, you can read it in like 20 minutes. And so I sat down and read this book, and I thought, oh, this is that tiny accident that my mother talked about. That she just said, oh, some kids were hurt and some kids were seriously hurt. So actually, what did occur that day? And it was very different from what my mother's initial description was. But on that last day of school in 1927, here's my mother on the left and my dad on the right, and you can tell he was going to rule the world. He was going to move on from Bath, and he was going to, there were no limits for him. But on the last day of school in 1927, she was a sophomore, and he was the senior class president and valedictorian of the class. And she remembers the only thing I ever got from her was when she was in her 80s, she moved into a senior center, and she taught a writing class for the seniors in the senior center. And one of the things she wrote was a one-page history of her Bath experience. So that's the only thing I ever got from her about the Bath. But she remembered that last day of school being this beautiful blue sky, the prettiest day of the entire spring, because they'd had a storm the night before that had cleared the skies, and it was just brilliant blue. And she was very excited because she and my dad, Byron, had 2 dates. And her 3rd date was going to be special guests at commencement that upcoming Saturday. So she remembers being just very, very excited. So she was at school that last day, and here's the senior class picture of my dad there in the center. And, you can tell he was moving on. He was going to go forward there. But they were going to, so she was very excited. She was at school, and they were going to have this, the commencement. And so she's sitting in the 2nd floor of the school. Get back to there. She's sitting on the 2nd floor of the school on the other side of this building, on the northeast side. This is going north and south, this building. And she was on the northeast side, and down the center of the building on the second floor is this hallway, and it has large glass doors looking out from the classroom out into the hallway. And she's writing her paper, and she remembers him coming down the hallway because he was on his way to the Methodist church, which still sits there, this little one-room church right next to the school. And he was on his way to the church to practice for his commencement. So he walks by her glass doors, and she remembers waving to him or just nodding or just acknowledging him or whatever. And going back to writing her paper, and her teacher that day was the superintendent of the school, Emery Hike, and he was kind of in charge of the class that day. So she goes back to writing her paper, and right after she turns back to her paper, there's a vroom. And the lights, which were hanging on steel rods, started to swing gently, and the air filled with dust. And she immediately looks out the glass doors there where my dad had walked there, and there's blue sky there. There's no school. This whole part on this northwest side had come down. It had missed him by seconds. He was walking down that hallway, and it just missed him. Well, you can imagine it was complete panic in the classroom. You know, the kids were up, and they were just, I can't even imagine being in that situation. But the teacher, the boys, of course, wanted to jump out the windows, and the teacher said, don't jump out the windows. Consumers Power was in town that week putting in electricity, and somehow he saw or he knew they were coming with the ladders. He says, wait for the ladders. And so they waited for the ladders. My mother gets out of the school, and she walks around. She had a pretty green dress on, she said, and she had some new pencils. So she threw her pencils down off the ladder into the grass. She goes down and finds her pencils, and she walks around the school, and this is what she sees. This whole part of the school had come down. Like I said, my dad was walking right down this hallway. So she came around to this end, and she sees that her little sister's okay. She was in that other end of the school, the other part of the elementary, and she sees that she's okay. So she walks. There's another picture that at this point they had they'd come up with like telephone poles because they thought the whole school was going to come down. So they're trying to brace it from coming down completely. This is the only thing my mother ever wrote on a picture, and this was a picture of it, and she said, I was here. This was her classroom, and this is the glass door that she looked out and saw my dad walking down the hallway. That's how close he was. So she gets another just shot of that classroom. And this is an aerial photo, and basically afterwards it had made aerial photo. But this was her classroom, and this is where they put the ladder up on the shed. And she was able to get down there. She walked around, found her sister here. She was okay. So she walks, this is Main Street right here, and she goes out Main Street to her family home, which still sits there in Bath, like 30-year-old brick home, still sits there in Bath. And she walks home, and she gets to the road that I rode in on, that Clark Road, that paved road. She gets to that corner, and she prepares to go across the road. And here comes down the road this Model T with Andrew Keogh in it, the school board treasurer. And she remembers he had his hands on the steering wheel, and his teeth were, grimaced, that he had gold teeth. He had a couple gold teeth. She remembers his smile, his grin, or grimace, I should say, and his hands on the steering wheel. And she thought, he's the school board treasurer. He's coming in to help because he knows all about the school and about building and construction. He's coming in to help with everything that's going on. So she waits for him to turn, and she crosses the road. She crosses Clark Road right there, and she sees up the road. His farm was 1.5 miles up the road west on Clark Road, and she sees smoke coming out of his farm. And she thought, oh no, poor Mr. Kehoe, he's got a fire in his farm, which happened a lot back then, farm fires. And he's coming in to get help, and he won't be able to get help because everybody's at the school dealing with the tragedy. So she crosses the road, goes up to her house right there, grabs the doorknob of her door, and there's another boom, and a steel bolt comes through their picture window. And my grandmother, was, of course, right there at the front, because she heard everything that was going on. and she sees a bolt come through her picture window, and she said, my mother said she immediately knew, the grandmother knew that it was the Ku Klux Klan, because they'd been in town the week before with a rally downtown about the Catholics and the Jews and the, whatever they were going on about. And my family was the only Catholic family in town, so they knew, she knew that that's what had happened. But of course, what had happened was Andrew Kehoe in his Model T, as he whipped the corner and my mother crossed the road, the Consumer Power Boys were running up the road at that point with their ladders. And this came out at the coroner's inquest a week later. And they said he came, roaring up behind them, so they got out of his way. He roars up to the school, just that 3 blocks right there. So they see him veer over to the curb in front of the school. The superintendent, who was my mother's teacher that day, came running over. They were both on the school board. And he comes running over, and he put his foot up on the running board of the Model T, and they said it looked like there was some commotion between the two of them. And it looked like, they couldn't tell for sure, but it looked like he fired his gun in the back of his Model T truck that he had loaded with dynamite and farm tools and nuts and bolts and this kind of thing. And so that's what came through my mother's picture window. And here's Kehoe's car. That's all that's left of it, of his Model T truck. And so it killed him, it killed the superintendent, it killed a 95-year-old man, Nelson McFerrin, who was standing across the street. Killed him, killed an 8-year-old boy who'd come out of the school on the curb, and it blew off the leg of the mailman. And the mailman was laying there, and they went running to him. And you can imagine, the school has come down, this car has blown up. I mean, can you imagine how people were even processing this? And they went running to the mailman, and he said, "Boys, you're my friends. Leave here. The school is, or the trees are full of it." Because he just thought, you can't imagine what he was thinking at that point. But anyway, so that was what happened at that point. And then this was a car that was nearby, and another more destruction, and another view of his car. So they realized that they became aware immediately, the people there, that something was going on worse than just a building collapse. So they started grabbing the kids out of the school. Of course, there were 38 dead children, all in the elementary grades, and 2 teachers died, and then those people on the curb. So there were 38 children and 6 adults died at that point. And at that point, matter of fact, one of the last things the superintendent had done was he had gone downtown, and however you communicated back then, he contacted Lansing and let Lansing know that this had happened. And so the National Guard and police and Red Cross and whoever were the major entities out there were back to Bath very quickly, because it's very close to Lansing. And they started hauling the kids out of the school and getting all this kind of stuff. And so what do they find in the school? They start finding sticks of dynamite. So they get everybody out of the school. They just evacuate the entire school because it became very apparent that something else was going on. So they got to do this. And so what they found was dynamite. They found timers. These were fuses and timers. And you can see they were, this came out that, Andrew Kehoe, the school board treasurer, he had made these out of these milk cans and milk bottles. He fashioned the whole things together by himself. And they started finding those on site. And here's 2 more fuses that they found that had not gone off. Here were some more they found. And at the coroner's inquest later, of course, this was all determined that Andrew Kehoe had done all this. But this is what, if it wasn't bad enough, this is what they took out of the school that did not explode. They took out over 500 pounds of dynamite. Otherwise, it would have been a mushroom cloud in Bath. The entire town would have been destroyed. And what they determined later was that he had, talk about that, but he had set fuses. And he had, that the fuses had not all, had gone off, so it kind of saved some of the dynamite. But who was Andrew Kehoe? Well, there's only one picture that exists of Andrew Kehoe, and this is it. Him and his wife Nellie Price, and Andrew himself, he was born in Tecumseh, Michigan, if you know where that is. It's down by Ann Arbor. He was born in Tecumseh of a family of 13 kids, and he had graduated from Tecumseh. He'd gone to Michigan State. He'd met Nellie Price, who was the niece of a famous auto manufacturer in Lansing at that time, Ray Price of REO Auto Manufacturing. And so he comes back to Lansing after he graduates from Tecumseh. He goes to Michigan State, and then he leaves Michigan State to go to St. Louis, Missouri to get education in electronics and building and all this kind of stuff. And he comes back to East Lansing, reunites with Nellie, his girlfriend from college, and they get married in 1919, and they move out to her family owned a house in Bath, this beautiful house. I'll show you the house here. This is a 1922, this size of a house in Bath, Michigan. I lived in Bath in the 50s, and it wouldn't even fit on their porch, our house back then. So this house it had three floors, hardwood oak floors, and all three, pressurized water systems, and oh my gosh, it was just a palace. But he moved out there. He and Nellie moved there in 1922, and he started to because he was connected with her. He was connected with her family. The family had owned the house out in Bath. He immediately got accepted into the Bath culture circle and the politics and all this kind of stuff. And he had a history, he had a background in electronics and engineering and electricity and all this kind of stuff. So he became very helpful, right away, and immediately got involved in politics in the area. He got appointed to as county clerk. He was appointed for a 3-year term as the school board, and he was also the treasurer of the school. So he was immediately, accepted into the community. And he and Nellie, in fact, had weekly card parties at their house. I mean, they would come to the house and play cards and this kind of thing. And at the inquest later that week, and the next week, they asked, people testify about him. And they said he was very meticulous. He was very precise and all this kind of stuff. And he hosted the card parties, but if you played the wrong card, you'd hear from Andrew, because he wouldn't let anything go wrong. But he was very well accepted, and the farmers around his neighborhood, he knew about engineering and electricity, and that was all becoming part of farming back then. So he became kind of a resource to these farmers around the house. So he kind of had that, he was accepted by a lot of people, and he was accepted in the community. But one of the things that was driving him back then was he was very against, it was when he got out to Bath in 1922, it was all one-room schoolhouses. And at that point, there was a movement to consolidate the schools into one schoolhouse. And he was very against it, because of the taxes, and the taxes would go up on farmers and the government and overreach and all this kind of stuff. And he was very opposed to it, so he's violently opposed to it. And on the school board, his major enemy was Emory Hike, that superintendent that he blew up that day. And Emory Hike was very educated as well at Michigan State. He also went to Michigan State College, as it was called back then, before it was Michigan State University. But he came from the side where it's important to enlarge the schools and consolidate the schools and have government intervention and help, and this kind of thing to help with education of kids. And so they were always fighting. They were always opposed with each other on the school board, even after the consolidated school opened. And the school board minutes indicate this violent rhetoric between them. It's Andrew Kehoe he wanted the pay cut for the superintendent. He didn't want him appearing at school board meetings. I mean, there was all this kind of stuff. But he was still involved in the school board. And this is Emory Hike. This was his opponent. This was the superintendent. And like I said, Emory came from a whole different kind of background and was really, really supportive of the entire school. So what happened with Andrew? Andrew was, he was on the school board, he was on the treasurer, he was county clerk. 1924, not 1924, but 1925 and 26, things started to kind of unravel with Andrew. He wasn't reappointed as the county clerk. It didn't look like he was going to get elected to the school board again. The treasurer, they had him stop being the treasurer. At the same time, the local residents started noticing or started commenting that Andrew wasn't farming anymore. He didn't seem like he was farming his perfect farms, because he had this perfect farm he'd bought from her parents, and they said it seemed like he'd stopped farming. And it was easy to tell when Andrew stopped farming, because they said he always dressed in that black suit when he was farming, when he was on his tractor. And if he got dirty, he would go back in and change his suit and get back on the tractor. And they all thought, okay, well, that's Andrew. He's kind of weird, he's kind of, that's different. That's kind of what he is. But that's the kind of guy he was. He was real precise, and just, everything had to be perfect and clean and this kind of thing. So he had that kind of personality. But one of the things he did that year, things were going kind of awry, but he got, the Bath school had an infestation of bees, and the bees were swarming the entire school. And Andrew announced to the school board that he'll take care of the bees. And the bees were gone, and nobody knew what he did. They never did know what he did to the bees, but he took care of the entire bee infestation at the school. I mean, that's the kind of perfectionist he was. But he also was, like I said, he was very helpful to his neighbors and this kind of thing. And one thing he did also in 25 and 26, everything was just kind of going awry. Nellie started having health problems. Well, as you can imagine, Nellie kind of knew who she was living with, I think, and she started having respiratory issues. She was having constant visits to the hospital in Lansing. Matter of fact, her father had bankrolled one of the major hospitals in Lansing that she kept visiting, and she'd be in for respiratory issues, and she'd stay a couple nights, and then she'd be back on the farm. And so she was continuing to have that kind of stuff. And, and then he was having all his issues with everything else. But one of the things he got during that time period, even though he was losing, like he wasn't getting as much success on the school board, he wasn't appointed county clerk and this kind of thing, is he still had access to the school because he had volunteered or gotten the bid to put electricity into the new school, into the new consolidated school, because that was his background. And that's what he did. He did it perfectly. In the years 25 and 26, he installed like those lights that my mother saw swinging that last day of school. He installed the electricity that powered all of that. But what he also did in 1925 and 26 is he bought hundreds of pounds of dynamite and pyritol at the farm stores down in Jackson and Lansing. And back then you could get a lot of that because it was post-World War I dynamite and pyritol, and he bought hundreds of pounds of it and brought it back to his farm. And he used it to help his neighbors, blow up stumps on their farms. He had to clear this kind of stuff, and he was getting very good at that. And so he was working on that, but he would, kind of fine-tuning everything to do all that. You had to make your own fuses, and you had to make your own wiring to attach to all this kind of stuff. So he was working on all that. At the same time, he was working on putting electricity into the new school. So what does he do? And this was found out this was uncovered within a week after all this occurred. They had the coroner's inquest in Bath, a public meeting in Bath less than a week later at the community center in downtown Bath. You've got 38 dead kids and 6 adults. They have this public meeting of looking into what happened. And what they concluded basically was that Andrew Kehoe had done it all, that he had acted alone, he had anybody helping him, this kind of thing, and they had 54 people testify. 54 residents of Bath testify at the coroner's inquest, but they found out everything that went on. But basically what had happened was, as he was putting in the electricity that in 1926 and early 1927, he was there at all times of day and night, and nobody ever questioned, why he was there, but he was working on the electricity. But while he did it, in one part of the school, in the new part of the school, it was crawl spaces underneath the school, in the part that did not blow up. And he had put down eaves trough piping down the length of the entire school, and he had bamboo rods that he shoved down piles, 30-pound bags of dynamite down underneath the crawl spaces to exactly where he wanted them. In the other part of the school, the older part of the school, he had the pyritol in there, and he was able to put that easier to where he exactly wanted it. And so what they suspected was, that something got disconnected, that it set off the dynamite but did not set off, or it set off the pyritol but did not set off the dynamite. So basically what they concluded, they had, my dad was one of the presenters one of the people who testified at the coroner's inquest, and he said he was walking down the hallway and the whole building went down behind him. He ran to the end of the school. He jumped out the school, out the windows, and he helped haul the kids out of the school at that point. But basically what happened, and that's what they were able to decipher, at the coroner's inquest, exactly the time, what happened during the day. And basically what happened was at 8:30 that morning, Andrew Kehoe went into the school, and the plumber had asked him to help with some plumbing issues in the school. But he shows up at the school, and they suspect he set his timers and his clocks at that point. There were two of them. There was one for the pyritol and one for the dynamite. He set those, and he tells the janitor, and he says, I have to go. And the janitor thought, well, this is kind of odd, the way all of a sudden he had to go. And he leaves the school. He gets home. He drives the 2 miles home to his farm, and Nellie, who had come home from the hospital that previous weekend, he had gotten her home, and she had died sometime between the weekend and that Thursday. So she died of a blunt force injury, and they don't know what happened to her. But they found her out I have a picture of where she was out there. But he gets home and he sets off explosions, and he sets off things at his farm. He sets off some dynamite or whatever he had setting off in the barn in the house. And he had his neighbors, the few farmers that lived around him. He was their buddy, and so they see this and they come running over to his farm. This is about 8:30, quarter to 9, and they come running over to him, and he comes running out of his house, and he says, boys, you're my friends. Leave here and go to school. And they thought, what's he talking about? He jumps in his truck, and he takes off, and they hear the vroom. It was 2 miles away. They could hear what happened in Bath. And then at some point, he gets into, about 9:30 is when he drove into the school. He finally, and passes my mother and passes the guys and gets up to the school. But he got up there, and that's what that's when that occurred. But anyway, so that's what the scenario that last day. But at the coroner's inquest, they had people who testified that he was a great guy. He helped them with their farms. And he never meant to do this. He never meant to kill children, is what their argument was. As a matter of fact, one of the witnesses at the inquest said he meant it to go off the night before, because the night before the school board had met. So they said he meant it to go off the night before. Well, of course, back then they didn't have 24-hour clocks. So when he set the timer, it was that morning that he set it for. He didn't set it for the previous night kind of thing. But he did that. But he got the they determined all that. But they had, like I said, they had people who they had to separate a couple of the witnesses at the inquest, because here you got somebody across the aisle who's lost 2 children. Then you have somebody saying he never would have meant to do this. This wasn't this kind of thing. But the question always was, and the question at the inquest was, well, why did he do this? Well, of course, there was no explanation of why he did this, because there was no explanation. I mean, he killed 38 kids and 6 adults. And what they came up with, though, a few weeks later, a panel of physicians met down in Owasso, and they actually came up with the term psychopath. And a psychopath, they said, is somebody who's very precise. They're very, tight-fisted. They're very frugal. They're very, but they don't take account for their own actions. They don't trust other people, and this kind of thing. And they've kind of got that dual personality where they're real precise, but they also don't trust others, kind of thing, were the major definitions of the psychopath. Matter of fact, a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, in mid-COVID, I was invited to do this presentation for the University of Colorado School of Behavioral Sciences, because they had the exact replica of Andrew Kehoe at the University of Colorado. Does anybody remember who that would have been? Any trivia? Ted Bundy was at the University of Colorado. He was white, handsome, educated, successful. You know, he had all that personality, but also he was, you know, a mass killer. But he had the same exact psychopathic personality as Andrew Kehoe, where he had that outgoing and, you know, kind of, you know, successful personality, but he had that crazy side to him. And then also they thought they came up with at the coroner's inquest that he'd stopped farming, you know, that year, 1926, 1927. And also the bank had foreclosed on his property because he stopped paying payments on his farm. And at the time they thought, well, that's what, you know, he had, you know, that was a big thing. But the family said they were not, you know, foreclosing on him. They weren't throwing the family out of the house. They weren't trying to collect his money, but it was just a bank procedure at that point. But they kind of pointed that as to another thing that kept on driving him over the edge. And, you know, just one thing after another. But this is what was left of that barn, the farm, that beautiful farmhouse after he was done with it. And one of the things he had done before the explosion is he had girdled the animals together at their feet so they couldn't escape the barns. He had cut off the trees and his plants and bushes, you know, so it looked like they were still there, but they were dead. And the theory was that he didn't want the bank to get anything. They weren't going to get anything out of this farm, so he had destroyed everything. This was where they found his wife's body out in the barn. And she was in one of the carts, and she had all her earthly possessions, her jewels and her family heirlooms and everything were in the cart with her, you know, out in the barn. He'd gotten rid of everything that she had. And once again, this is the farm there, or the school, I should say. Before they were very worried at the beginning because they thought that roof was going to take down the whole rest of the school, so they were very concerned about how, but it all withstood everything at that point. This is once again, that part of the school that came down that had the pyritol in it. That's my mother's classroom right on the left. That's how close, once again, she was to it. Here's the, right afterwards, the people in the town and the people coming to help. You can see the people walking around. I mean, they're stunned. They're not, you know, I can't imagine even being there. And there's on the other end, you see the shed that was attached to my mother's classroom, and that's where they put the ladders up to help those kids down off to school. And here are 3 children, and this is right afterwards. And it was all the elementary, all the fatalities were in the 2nd to 6th grades. So these 3 girls are staying there, and you know they lost classmates and friends and family, God knows what. But here they are standing looking at this rubble before they knew, you know, who had died yet. But you know, and once again, at the inquest, they had covered that he had he wasn't working with anybody. It was all his design that he had done this. And he never talked to anybody, of course. And the only thing he left was a handmade sign, a perfect sign on the fence in front of his farm that said, "Criminals are made, not born." So this wasn't me, this was you that did, you know, made me do this kind of thing. Only thing he left. Once again, just another shot. That's my mother's shot there where she showed where she was up in the hallway. The hospitals, of course, were packed in Lansing. And once again, this is Sparrow Hospital that Deli Price's dad had funded, or I mean her uncle had funded the hospital where most of the kids were. There were 58 injuries, 36 fatalities, and 58 injuries. And once again, these are nurses trying to identify, it looks like, children on the ground there. And these are covered, you know, fatalities down there that people are trying to identify. And once again, just the same part of that school. And the question always is, why was this so, you know, nobody knows about this. And this is the State Journal, the Lansing State Journal, right after it happened. You know, dead in school blast, 40 injured at Lansing Hospital, maniac bomber. This is a Santa Fe, New Mexican. Dynamiter kills scores of children, so it was huge everywhere, a huge story. But it was the same week that Lindbergh lands in Paris. So all of the headlines become Lindbergh. And this is the story on that here. Maniac, dynamiter. Official theory, but everything else is Lindbergh. Everything else is Lindbergh. And also, another reason that it was never really, found out about, discovered, by the public was, there was such a mass rescue attempt by everybody from Lansing. The governor of Michigan and the senator, the U.S. senator, came out from Lansing and helped with the recovery and helped with everything. And 3 days after the event, the governor makes an official announcement saying the school will be rebuilt where it is. Bath does not have to pay for it. I will pick up the tab, and the senator, James Couzens was his name, we will pay for it. It will be rebuilt right where it is, and there will be no mention of Andrew Kehoe. So we're moving on. That was the official policy. And I think everybody just kind of said, yep, we're going to do that. That's what we're going to do. And, that we did that with the Spanish flu and the plague and World War I. And you name it, the idea was to move forward and move into the future. And so that was the official policy. And it wasn't until, it's so interesting, it wasn't until 1977 that they actually commemorated a plaque at the site of the school. And this was in 1977, and they saved the cupola from the school. They had the cupola that they had at the place where the school was, and they had the stone with all of the students listed. Here were the two people from the public that were killed, and then there were two teachers, and then the superintendent. So they had them up there. And some of the people who had not graduated, and it would have been my dad, they received diplomas at that ceremony. My mother was there, and it was quite a ceremony. But it was right at the site of the bombing. But the only thing that was there, like I said, was the cupola. Nellie, speaking of moving forward and not talking about anything, this is where Nellie was buried, and Ellen was her official, Ellen Price, and she was buried in the family mausoleum in Mount Hope Cemetery in Lansing, and under the marker of Ellen Price. There was no mention of Kehoe. Kehoe was gone to the family, so it was just Ellen. And then Kehoe's remains were buried in a pauper cemetery in St. John's. I think the name is Rose Cemetery in St. John's, where you can still see there's a marker that's unmarked, and that's his remains. But everybody, there was only, this is a picture of one of the kids in the hospital, and to have gone through that and to still have that smile on her face is just astounding to me. But that's the kind of positive outlook a lot of people had back then, especially the kids. This was Lansing State Journal contacted me a couple years ago, and this was a woman that was in the Bath school. She wasn't at school that day, but they wanted me to contact her because she'd been a student, and she was the oldest surviving student of the Bath school. And I finally got a hold of her, and the next day was her 113th birthday. And so she was 112 years old when I talked to her, and of course she had no idea who I was or what I didn't try to belabor it at all, but it was very interesting talking to her just for a couple minutes. And we do have a Northern Michigan connection. This was one of the teachers, Nina Matson. And she went to Michigan State and, Michigan State College, and was educated and went to, taught at Bath. But after this, she moved to St. Ignace, and she was from St. Ignace area. So actually, my parents would visit her. And when I was a little kid, we'd take the ferry over to St. Ignace, and they'd visit her. Of course, they would never mention who she was. They just knew her from the past, and it was just kind of confusing, but nothing to mention there. This is one of the teachers that died, Hazel Weatherby, and they found her, and they said they found her with two children in her arms as they found her. So she was one of the teacher fatalities. But my parents, what did they do? Well, this is 1929, and this is my mother doing her Bonnie and Clyde imitation. and fishing in her dress and her fancy shoes, and 1929, and she's moving forward. And she went to school and became a teacher and was successful her entire career, and did great in everything she did. But she moved on. This is her family. This was her brother, who was not in school that day. That was her little sister on the left that she found that was not injured at all in the school. And her brother, the older brother, had graduated, and he was out in the fields when the explosion happened. And my mother wrote in that one piece that she remembered him lying on the ground behind the house sobbing because he had been in the school helping to haul kids out of the school, and he was back on the farm just, destroyed by it. But I never heard him mention anything as well. And this is my dad on the left, in 1929 as well, with a friend of his from, I don't remember where the friend was from, but my dad on the left, he's got his megaphone, he's got his suit on, he's going to rule the world, right? He's going to move forward from this. And what happens in 1929, of course? Everything crashes, and he's back on the farm. And so he never went anywhere after that other than being on the farm. And once again, this is the cupola they've got at the school, and they erected this in the 90s in the park right there where the school existed, and it actually describes it and describes the girl with the cat statue. And when I started looking into this, I went out to Bath. I went out to this place because I thought, okay, they'll have something there, some memorial, some library of some sort, some museum kind of thing. And I get out to the school, and this says right on here that Fred Green created a fund across the country that people could donate to, and James Cousins, he and James Cousins donated money that rebuilt the school, and that's what they renamed the school as James Cousins, Consolidated School at that point.
Excuse me.
And then they talked about the girl with the cat. Yeah.
You say that they were donating money. Was
Yes.
that government money?
Nope, that was James Cousins and Fred Green with their money. They said Bath will not have to pay for this, and we're paying for the
I said
reconstruction.
that earlier, I was still wondering.
Yeah, and then it reopened.
That's how politicians get around.
Yeah, right, and it was rebuilt in the same spot and opened the next year, and, there was never any talk about what happened, of course. And now they just had this past May, they had the 97th anniversary of the event, and I was down in Lansing to visit my sister, and I found out about it. I just happened to be down there, and I found out about it. And I went out to it, and I thought, okay, they'll have something bigger, 97th anniversary at the site of the school. I get out to there, and there's 8 people out there with little chimes, and they're ringing a bell for each kid that died, during this, the event. And nothing else is being discussed except there. And now they're talking about Bath is actually going to build a one-room memorial, some kind of museum there at the site, which is amazing that they're actually going to do that. But there was very little going on, and so they just kind of went around and they talked about different children who had died. And they got to me, and they said, the reporter from 9 and 10 News said, would you like to say something for the cameras? And I said, sure. And so I told them that I do this presentation now because my dad was the senior class president, that kind of thing. And they said, well, what do you think the community, or what have we learned, or where do we go from here? And I said, well, one of the things that has happened since then is if you want to buy dynamite, he bought hundreds and hundreds of pounds of dynamite in 1925 and 1926. If you want to buy dynamite now, you have to go, has anybody bought dynamite? Ever? You have to go through a 7-page application to apply for a purchasing permit. I mean, it's a big, long process, And so you can get it, but you really have to comply with all sorts of different things. And last year we had, and I forget what it was, but it was less than 20 fatalities with dynamite, with accidents, where things accidentally went off and this kind of thing. So we still had a few accidents. But last year we had, and it was over 50,000 gun deaths last year, but you and I can go to Dunham's in a half an hour and get a gun. So maybe we have to do the same thing we did with dynamite that we do with, we don't ban them, but you have to make them, a very, structured policy to get to them. But they moved on. Like I said, my parents moved on, and these people moved on. And when I was in grade school, and like I said, I didn't go to Bath to school, but we'd be in the Cub Scouts. I'd be in the Cub Scouts, and there would be a march we'd end up at the cemetery in downtown Bath, and here's all these markers of these multiple kids and families that had died back then. And I thought, well, what are these? And I didn't even ask anybody, and I just thought, okay, it's the flu. It was back then. It was back in that time period. It's a Spanish flu or something. But there was never any comment at the time about that. And there's still, like I said, there are people down there who don't know anything about it. It's just astounding. But the idea was to move on, and they did. I could see my dad in this picture looking forward. He never looked back, and I don't remember him ever having an enemy in his life, and he knew that you only had, you didn't have much time that could go right now, so they all moved on from it. But and like I said, it's something that is in history now, but you wouldn't know it because there's very little mention of it.
The historical marker doesn't mention the perpetrator's name.
Right. And that was, and Fred Green, he was very precise about that. He said there will be no mention of Andrew Kehoe. We're moving on. I know, isn't that something? And you get to in his marker at the cemetery, there's no mention of Andrew Kehoe at the marker. And it's just like he did disappear. And, but the community moved on, but they're going to start to try to recognize it more and more. So, any other questions?
Do you know if he killed himself deliberately or accidentally?
Oh, well, they determined that he did. The witnesses, the consumer power guys that were running up, that saw him move over, and it looked like he turned and fired his rifle into the back of his car, that hit the dynamite and blew up the car. Yeah, so he did it deliberately. Yes, he meant to do it, and he was, and that's what they determined at the inquest. That everything had done very precisely. He planned everything. It was only him. And he carried this out, as meticulously as you can. Yeah.
The presence of the Klan earlier
Right.
in that week.
Right.
What do you think influence that played in the decision with Kehoe?
Well, I don't know. He was, he had nothing to do with the Ku Klux Klan. They were just in town that week, having a thing at the park there, downtown Bath, and. So I don't think it had much to do at all. But in terms of one other thing I didn't mention is he had at the inquest they talked about his association with children, and he would have kids' parties out at his farm because he had that perfect farm and the perfect, just everything was perfection. And the week before, one of the teachers in the grade school had called him, and she wanted a picnic, the end of school picnic out at his farm. And he'd asked her what day that was, and she wanted to do it Thursday. And he said, that won't work. And that was the day it occurred. But he actually had that kind of relationship with teachers and kids, where they actually would come out and be at his farm. Anyway, anything else? Any other questions? Any comments? Yeah.
It's not a question, but just
Right? Sure.
it's just a comment.
Right?
Nina Matson was my father's cousin.
Oh,
And she was injured in that.
right.
And she was crippled. She walked with a.
Right. I remember my parents saying that. Yep.
But the good thing was she went on to continue to be a teacher.
Oh, I know. Just like, yeah. And and my mother was, she was, encouraged by that kind of stuff, and she went on to be a teacher. Yeah, but I forgot that about Nina. Yeah. I've asked other audiences, do people have any contacts with this stuff? And it's been interesting to have every once in a while, one or two people in a presentation will have some direct connection to somebody, like one was related to the 95-year-old that was killed across from Kehoe's car. People had, connections to teachers and different kids. And I had one guy in Traverse City raise his hand, and he said, well, he had grown up out near Robson Road, 1 mile away from me. And so, of course, I knew nothing about him because I didn't know anybody out in the country. And he and his friends would go drinking in high school on Kehoe's grave out in St. John's. They found his unmarked grave, and I said, only guys would do that. How predictable that you would do that. But they actually knew where his grave was in St. John's. But other than that, I've had some interesting connections with people who've had, yeah.
What happened to the superintendent?
Well, he was killed when he blew up the car, yeah. And he was, Emery Hike, the superintendent. And if you look at the school notes of the school board meetings, there was always this contention between the two of them. He didn't want Emery Hike paid as much, and he didn't want him appearing at school board meetings, and it was all about the school. Because Emery Hike was all for the new consolidated school, and Andrew Kehoe was totally against it because of the taxes and the government and the control and, this kind of stuff. But, yeah, he was,
Is there a school there that's finished today?
yes, matter of fact,
It's used.
yes, and they built, down the hill, they built a new high school and middle school and this kind of thing. And I went down to the new school because I thought, okay, there'll be, like I said, there'll be some kind of memorial, to the school. And I go to the front desk and I asked the teacher, I said, I understand you have something about that. And she said, oh yeah, it's down that hallway, it's down the other hallway, it's down the other hallway. And you get down there and here's this one classroom that isn't publicized, you wouldn't know it was there unless somebody told you it was there. And they have some photos and some memorabilia, but they really don't want it. They just don't want to deal with it. It's just too unpleasant of a thing to contend with. So, but yeah, they've got a new school there.
I've got a question about this consolidation, because when I was in kindergarten, in 1953,
Uh-huh,
and I was a farm kid in
Right.
Canton, which is 5 miles from Tecumseh.
okay.
Um,
Oh,
Yeah, but the consolidation was going on in our district at
Right,
that time.
right.
Because I was, 1951, our elementary school was actually built in Clinton.
right.
And so it was 2 years old when I started kindergarten.
Mhm.
My brother went to the country school.
Oh, yeah.
Well, there were a lot of them, but he went to the one near
Right,
us.
right.
In 52, so I don't know how, and it was going on, I know, in 56,
Yeah.
57, a lot of
Right.
my classmates came to the main school then, so that's been going on, I guess, for a lot.
Yes, yes, and one of the reasons he was opposed to it, they concluded afterwards, is he had that was pretty obvious at the time, is he had a school bus, if you want to call it that, a contract for delivery of kids to these different, well, then he lost that with the consolidated school. So once again, he was opposed to it for, financial reasons and control reasons and all this kind of stuff. But, yeah,
Seems like Mid-Michigan has had a long string of absolutely crazy people.
Yes.
And, this is just an example.
right,
Go back to Timothy McVeigh.
Oh, yeah.
And several other
right,
notorious types.
right,
He was in the thumb,
He was, from
the thumb.
yeah,
Don't
but
be
kinda,
Catholic version of the-
yeah,
No,
kinda.
I'm just saying,
Well, and that's what's so interesting about, Lindbergh and Kehoe. They were both, Lindbergh was down in Detroit at that point, and Kehoe was in Tecumseh, and so the two major stories of the entire world are located in southeast Michigan at that point, so it's just fascinating. But it's a page in history that is, like I said, Michael Moore was talking about it, and after that, there was John Fuselgank, if you remember him, he was on NPR, he had a show, and he was talking one day about the, I don't know which one he was talking about, if he was talking about Parkland or Oklahoma, so whatever it was, he was talking about something about school children, and he was going on about, and he said, I have George Robson from Petoskey on the line, I stand corrected, because he didn't know about it, he talked about these other mass killings of school children, and it was actually, mid-Michigan that had the worst one, but the, like I said, the town moved on, and if you went down there now, and you looked for this park, you wouldn't be able to find it. There are no signs, there are no directions, there are no, they just have it there, and it's there, but they don't want it advertised, they don't want to publicize it at all, they just want to kind of not have to deal with it at all. Yeah,
Was his wife's frequent illnesses ever a cause for suspicion?
well, she had respiratory issues, that's a good question, because her family was very, apparently did not like Andrew, because she was always sick, and she was in the hospital and this kind of thing. And so, who knows what the connection was there, but when that last weekend, her family did not want her going home with Andrew. And so when he went to pick her up at the hospital, he told the hospital staff apparently that he was taking her to her family. And he took her home. And so they didn't know where she was and this kind of thing, and it was just one of those kinds of,
so that's
Tragedies.
like he killed her then?
yes. They're pretty sure that's what happened, but they don't know exactly how it happened.
Tell you the truth, to,
One issue.
I believe, I recall, or I read that, the superintendent perhaps intervened and stopped, more deaths because of him attacking at his vehicle, so he could get further into the school.
So you mean he protected
I mean,
things.
he might have stopped something that, you know, another exploding close.
Well, that's possible, that's possible. I mean, my mother, like I said, she remembers him coming down the road, and he has his hands on the steering wheel, and he's got a grimace on his face. And I thought, okay, he was a perfectionist, he knew what he did, he knew what he planned, all this kind of stuff, and he knew the school should have been up in flames. And he knew he'd screwed up, you know, I think is what his intention was, that his mindset. But then he sees his arch enemy coming at him, you know, and he just thought, okay, you know, this is perfect. I can, you know, yeah. But anyway, so Michigan State had two, you know, and that's why I've gone to Michigan State's museum and Michigan State's, you know, another place on campus to present this, and Michigan State wants nothing to do with it. And I think it's just that they both were Michigan State, the superintendent and Kehoe were both Michigan State graduates, and they just kind of want to, let's not talk about that. Yeah.
Do you think his intent was to blow up the whole school and have,
Oh, I think so. The amount, you know, because he was, yeah, because he was very knowledgeable and all that stuff, and he made his own fuses and made his own, you know, timers and wires and all that kind of stuff, and he knew exactly how much dynamite he put in. So he expected that whole other wing to go off too, and that didn't go. Otherwise, that whole other wing would have come down. So yeah, it would have killed everybody, I'm sure. There were over 200 people in the school at that point, so it would have been a mass fatality. Yeah.
So school boards have become a lightning rod for some people who have unusual values.
Right.
And you think that the Bath massacre would be an object lesson for school boards everywhere?
Yeah.
That this should be a cautionary tale that
Right.
is told over and over.
Right, exactly. No, I agree with you. And the thing that was so, you know, confusing and mind-numbing with him is he was so, you know, he had the experience in money, he had the experience in electricity, and, you know, so he was very influential and very knowledgeable in all these categories that the school was looking at. So he just had his, you know, he had his power to swing right in there, even though he had that, like I said, that psychopathic personality. So it was a hard case for people to deal with at that point. Yeah.
How accurate do you think Day of Days is as a novel? Story?
It's, you know, they all make up, yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it is a novel, you
Right.
know, and they, you know, make up, you know, what they were thinking or what their background was and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of just prefer to deal with the actual historical facts because we know it all. I mean, it's all there. And it's, you know, there's not much to make up at that point in terms of, so I kind of,
like the book wrote itself?
I'm sorry?
It's almost like the book wrote itself.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, and like I said, the only one that I have really spent much time with is the original, you know, the guy that lived right near Kehoe and has all the pictures and has all the actual, you know.
What's his name, the author there?
His was M.J. Ellsworth, and he was a neighbor that lived about 300 yards, you know, down the road from Kehoe. So he knew him on a personal basis in terms of farming and all this kind of stuff, but he also knew the facts right at the time, and he published that right then, so it's amazing he did that right at that point. Anything else? Anything else? All right, well, thank you for coming. That was a pleasure doing it. And if you have any questions on it, I got interviewed by 9 and 10 News down in Traverse City, and she had me set up a Facebook page. And so if you have questions on it, or if you think other places might want a presentation or something like that, you can contact me on that Facebook page, and it's called the Bath School Presentation on Facebook, and you can access it. So, all right, so thank you, Marty.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. All right. Quite a story, yeah?
That is quite a story.
Oh my gosh.